I threw the box at him, but I don't think he had time to open it. We didn't get to that stage of the conversation at which I had intended to produce the letter." "But why not? Why not?" Rupert rose to his feet, and coming to just opposite where Rischenheim sat, balanced himself on his heels, and looking down at his cousin, blowing the ash from his cigarette and smiling pleasantly. "Have you noticed," he asked, "that my coat's torn?" "I see it is." "Yes. The boarhound tried to bite me, cousin, and the forester would have stabbed me. And, well, the king wanted to shoot me." "Yes, yes. For God's sake, what happened?" "Well, none of them did what they wanted. That's what happened, dear cousin." Rischenheim was staring at him now with wide opened eyes. Rupert smiled down on him composedly. "Because, you see," he added, "Heaven helped me. So that, my dear cousin, the dog will bite no more, and the forester will stab no more. Surely the country is well rid of them." A silence followed. Then Rischenheim, leaning forward, said in a low whisper, as though afraid to hear his own question: "And the king?" "The king? Well, the king will shoot no more." For a moment Rischenheim, still leaning forward, gazed at his cousin. Then he sank slowly back into his chair. "My God!" he murmured. "My God!" "The king was a fool," said Rupert. "Come, I'll tell you a little more about it." He drew a chair up and seated himself in it. While he talked, Rischenheim seemed hardly to listen. The story gained in effect from the contrast of Rupert's airy telling. His companion's pale face and twitching hands tickled his fancy to more shameless jesting. But when he had finished, he gave a pull to his small, smartly curled moustache, and said with sudden gravity: "After all, though, it's a serious matter." Rischenheim was appalled at the issue. His cousin's influence had been strong enough to lead him into the affair of the letter. He was aghast to think how Rupert's reckless daredevilry had led on from stage to stage, till the death of a king seemed but an incident in his schemes. He sprang suddenly to his feet, crying: "But we must fly! We must fly!" "No, we needn't fly. Perhaps we'd better go, but we needn't fly." "But when it becomes known?" He broke off, and then cried: "Why did you tell me? Why did you come back here?" "Well, I told you because it was interesting, and I came back here because I had no money to go elsewhere." "I would have sent money." "I find that I get more when I ask in person. Besides, is everything finished?" "I'll have no more to do with it." "Ah, my dear cousin, you despond too soon. The good king has unhappily gone from us, but we still have our dear queen. We have also, by the kindness of Heaven, our dear queen's letter." "I'll have no more to do with it." "Your neck feeling?" Rupert delicately imitated the putting of a noose around a man's throat. Rischenheim rose suddenly and flung the window wide open. "I'm suffocated," he muttered with a sudden frown, avoiding Rupert's eyes. "Where's Rupert Rassendyll?" asked Rupert. "Have you heard of him?" "No, I don't know where he is." "We must find that out, I think." Rischenheim turned abruptly on him. "I had no hand in this thing," he said, "and I'll have no more to do with it. I was not there. What do I know of the king being there? I'm not guilty of it. On my soul, I know nothing of it." "That's all very true," nodded Rupert.
"Rupert," cried he, "let me go. Let me alone. If you want money, I'll give it to you. For God's sake, take it and get out of Strelsau."
"I'm ashamed to beg, my dear cousin, but in fact I want a little money until I can contrive to realize my valuable property. Is it safe, I wonder? Ah, yes, here it is." He drew from his inner pocket the Queen's letter. "Now, if the king hadn't been a fool," he murmured regretfully, as he regarded it. Then he walked across to the window and looked out. He could not himself be seen from the street, and nobody was visible at the windows opposite. Men and women passed to and fro on their daily labours or pleasures. There was no unusual stir in the city. Looking over the roofs, Rupert could see the royal standard floating in the wind over the palace and the barracks. He took out his watch. Rischenheim imitated his action. It was 10 minutes to 10. "Rischenheim," he called, "come here a moment. Here, look out." Rischenheim obeyed, and Rupert let him look for a minute or two before speaking again. "Do you see anything remarkable?" he asked then. "No, nothing," asked Rischenheim, still curt and sullen in his fright. "Well, no more do I. And that's very odd, for don't you think that Sapt or some other of Her Majesty's friends must have gone to the lodge last night?" "They meant to, I swear," said Rischenheim with sudden attention. "Then they would have found the king. There's a telegraph wire at Hofbau, only a few miles away, and it's 10 o'clock. My cousin, why isn't Strelsau mourning for our lamented king? Why aren't the flags at half mast? I don't understand it." "No," murmured Rischenheim, his eyes now fixed on his cousin's face. Rupert broke into a smile and tapped his teeth with his fingers. "I wonder," said he meditatively, "if that old player Sapt has got a king up his sleeve again. If that were so." He stopped and seemed to fall into deep thought. Rischenheim did not interrupt him, but stood looking now at him, now out of the window. Still there was no stir in the streets, and still the standards floated at the summit of the flagstaffs. The king's death was not yet known in Strelsau. "Where's Bauer?" asked Rupert suddenly. "Where the plague can Bauer be? He was my eyes. Here we are cooped up, and I don't know what's going on." "I don't know where he is. Something must have happened to him." "Of course, my wise cousin, but what?" Rupert began to pace up and down the room, smoking another cigarette at a great pace. Rischenheim sat down by the table, resting his head on his hand. He was wearied out by strain and excitement. His wounded arm pained him greatly, and he was full of horror and remorse at the event which had happened unknown to him the night before. "I wish I was quit of it," he moaned at last. Rupert stopped before him. "You repent of your misdeeds?" he asked. "Well, then, you shall be allowed to repent. Nay, you shall go and tell the king that you repent. Rischenheim, I must know what they are doing. You must go and ask for an audience of the king." "But the king is—" "We shall know that better when you've asked for your audience. See here." Rupert sat down by his cousin and instructed him in his task. This was no other than to discover whether there were a king in Strelsau, or whether the only king lay dead in the hunting lodge. If there were no attempt being made to conceal the king's death, Rupert's plan was to seek safety in flight. He did not abandon his designs. From the secure vantage of foreign soil he would hold the queen's letter over her head, and by the threat of publishing it ensure at once immunity for himself and almost any further terms which he chose to exact from her. If, on the other hand, the Count of Luzau Rischenheim found a king in Strelsau, if the royal standards continued to wave at the summit of their flagstaffs, and Strelsau knew nothing of the dead man in the lodge, then Rupert had laid his hand on another secret, for he knew who the king in Strelsau must be. Starting from this point, his audacious mind darted forward to new and bolder schemes. He could offer again to Rudolf Rassendyll what he had offered once before, 3 years ago, a partnership in crime and the profits of crime. Or if this advance were refused, then he declared that he would himself descend openly into the streets of Strelsau and proclaim the death of the king from the steps of the cathedral. "Who can tell?" he cried, springing up, enraptured and merry with the inspiration of his plan. "Who can tell whether Sapt or I came first to the lodge? Who found the king alive, Sapt or I? Who left him dead, Sapt or I? Who has most interest in killing him? I, who only sought to make him aware of what touched his honor, or Sapt, who was and is hand in glove with the man that now robs him of his name and usurps his place while his body is still warm? Ah, they haven't done with Rupert of Hentzau yet." He stopped, looking down on his companion. Rischenheim's fingers still twitched nervously, and his cheeks were pale. But now his face was alight with interest and eagerness. Again the fascination